When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Cocoa Beach, Orlando's closest beach, is also Florida's coolest beach. Bring your surfboard. Cocoa Beach is the surf capital of the East Coast, and we have the surf shops to prove it. Plus coffee shops, beachside bars, and restaurants. Wide open beaches make way for beach volleyball, cruiser bikes, kite surfing, shell seeking, surf fishing, and more. It's legendary. Plan your getaway from the everyday by checking out legendarycocobeach.com on Florida's Space Coast.
It's time to get inside the Giants Huddle.
Let's go, let's go, let's go!
On Giants.com.
I like it, I like it.
And the Giants mobile app.
Boom, give me some juice.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's roll!
Welcome to another episode of the Giants Huddle Podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. John Schmeelk with you, joined by longtime NFL personnel executive Randy Mueller. Currently, he writes for The Athletic, also host of the Football GM podcast, which you can find on the Athletic Football Show podcast feed. Randy has been in the league since 1983, including stints as general manager of the Saints and the Miami Dolphins, and he joins us right now to talk about the Giants offseason. Randy, it's good to do this. I was happy to meet you in person at the Combine. Hope all is well.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Good to be with you, John. You're making me feel old by listening to that intro, man. I need to tighten up my stuff here.
A lot of accomplishments, and that's why I want to have you on, because you've been through a lot. And you've been in situations like the Giants are this offseason in terms of what they're trying to deal with. So let's start with free agency first, because that comes first before the draft. And in your article on The Athletic, you gave the Giants your biggest roster upgrade award in your free agency breakdown after week 1 of free agency. And a lot of it had to do with the 2 offensive linemen they signed, John Runyon Jr. and Jermaine Illuminor, a player that you had ranked 16th on your free agency board. Runyon Jr. was 11th. Why did you like those 2 moves so much by the Giants?
Well, I think anytime you can upgrade an offensive line, you need to do it, because as we have kind of done a history check throughout the time of free agency, good offensive linemen do not normally come available. And I thought this was an abnormal group of quality. And I thought Joe Shane and the front office of the Giants acted quickly, and they had convictions for their evaluations. And I thought they were both good moves. The thing that's interesting about these 2 guys is they have experience, John, but they also have upside in that developing as being ascending type players, I think, is always good money spent. And I think what the Giants realize is maybe after year 1, they weren't as good as they thought they were. And this might be a little bit of a teardown for Giant fans, but I think it needs to be done till we can build up around them. And I think these 2 guys on the offensive line, to get 2 guys, and I know it's just one guy's list, but 2 guys in the top 20 at a position that I don't think you can ever go wrong upgrading, I think it's been an awesome job for them.
Yeah, now for Randy, for the fans that don't know, he puts together the Athletics free agency board. I think it was 150 strong this year, right? And
Correct.
You watch tape on all these guys, and I think you probably had these 2 offensive linemen rated higher than a lot of other people that do similar things. So let's start with John Runyon Jr. first. Besides the fact that he's an ascending player, when you watch this tape, when I went through it, I thought as a pass protector, you could see that he was a left tackle in Michigan, the way he protected the passer from the guard position. Right. What is it that you liked about his tape when you watched it?
I think the big thing about him for me is that his balance and ability to recover gives you a chance to succeed at the NFL level. Because as we both know, guys are really good. The defensive linemen are really good. You're going to be out of position and off balance. It's never going to go as you plan, but he finds a way to get back in character, back in balance, and then have enough strength to anchor himself, so that when they do bull rush him, the size, the mass, the what we call sand in the butt, he's got all of that. But I loved his balance. That's the big thing for me, is his ability to recover from an awkward position.
And then Jermaine Illuminor is interesting. We had a chance to talk to him after he signed here. I did like a 15-minute interview with the guy. Really interesting. And he flat out told me during the interview, in the first 5 years of my NFL career, and this is the quote, I sucked. I wasn't very good. I was bad. But he really thinks the last couple years, after being coached by Dante Scarnecchia in New England, and then Carmen Brasillo, who was also with him in New England, followed him to Vegas, that he's really been playing pretty good football these last couple of years. What did you like about his tape at right tackle? And what did you think about some of his position flexibility and his ability to move around a little bit too?
Well, I love this tape and I love the flexibility as well. And as you mentioned, here's a guy that developed from really nothing, being born out of the country, hadn't been around football a lot growing up. I think there's tons of upside. For me, he may have been the most undervalued guy of all the guys I looked for. I thought there'd be a bigger market. I'll be honest with you. I thought he would get paid more, and I thought teams would get into a bidding war for him. I agree that the ideal length for a tackle might be a little more than what he has, but he showed to me technique, arm length, ability to adapt on the edge and play really on an island as good as a lot of right tackles in this league. So I think the position flexibility that you mentioned make him an ideal guy to be your sixth lineman if he's not a starting tackle. I think he could play inside, he could play outside, and I love the kid's attitude. I mean, I'm sure you got to speak with him a little bit, in that you got to love a guy that's hungry like this, that wants to be a Giant per se. I thought it was a great fit, and I thought some other teams may have missed out on this guy, but I credit the Giants for really, like I said, having some convictions for their evaluations. And I would guess if you gave Joe Shane some truth serum, he would be shocked at how the price was affordable and how they could do it as quickly as they did. He'd be surprised at both those things.
All right, so let's dive into the offensive line situation before we head over to the Brian Burns move, Randy. As a guy who's putting a roster together, how valuable is it to have two guys like Runyon, who was the left guard for 2 years, right guard for 2 years, left tackle at Michigan, so he can play right guard or left guard, no problem. Illuminor, we mentioned the 4-position flexibility for him to set up a situation where you can get your best 5 linemen on the field when you have two guys like Illuminor and Runyon that have the position flex that they have.
Well, I think it's awesome because it's not if you get guys hurt, it's when. They're going to all play. In fact, you need to have 7 or 8 of these guys because they're going to all play. That's just the nature of the position and the league that we're in. These guys are playing long, hard seasons that are physically taxing, and you're going to miss some time. So I think it's more than a 5-man job. And the fact that these guys can move positions. How about this? If you say a guy gets hurt mid-drive, one of these guys could slide to another position in the middle of a drive on the field and not have to be coached up on it. That's valuable. Not to mention the week-to-week flexibility if you do get hit with some injuries. So I think it's protection. It's protection against the inevitable of the injuries. And so I think it's a great move for them and the Giants in particular to really kind of change the way they allocated their cap. And this gets on to another topic, but obviously they don't have Saquon Barkley. They don't have him, but they reallocated that money, I think, to building more of the foundation for this roster, building more of the foundation for the team where they probably weren't ready to spend 13, 14 million on a running back. They weren't. The rest of their team couldn't back that up. And now the choice is they get a Devin Singletary for 3 or 4 million versus what they would have had to pay for Saquon. And you have all these other players on top of it. I think it makes sense from a roster building standpoint.
Yeah, and the same way, not ready to pay a safety $17 million like Xavier McKinney.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a leg too far based on where they are. I'm with you. So we'll get to the other way they reallocated that money in a second. Put me in the GM shoes with a guy like Evan Neal, who was a top 10 pick. Obviously, when Joe Shane drafted him 2 years ago, he liked him enough to make him a high pick. His college tape was good, but in 2 years, he hasn't played well enough. And Joe Shane has said he needs to play better. But at the same time, he's only played in 22 NFL games. That's including 2 playoff games. He's battled lower body injuries for 2 years. But you bring in Illuminor, he gives you a bit of a backslide position at right tackle, right? So if you're the Giants, you're Joe Shane, you bring in a new offensive line coach this year. How are you handling Evan Neal and him at right tackle? When do you start considering moving him to the guard? Do you give him another year? How do you handle that whole process? Because it can't be an easy one.
Yeah, I think it's definitely at this point going to be, I think you got to find a way to get your best 5 on the field. And I don't know that you can do that until we get into training camp, but that will become apparent. It won't really be anybody's judgment. Those players will figure it out themselves. They'll either do it or they won't. That's the good thing about it. And you've got options. Illuminor, yeah, he pushes the right tackle position for sure. Maybe it's not him that moves into guard. Maybe it's somebody else that has to move into guard. The goal is to get the best 5 out there and give them a chance to work as a unit. So everybody can say, well, we didn't get this out of Evan Neal the first couple of years. He's got to fit in with the other 4 guys as well. So it's more about, I think, a unit and getting those guys to work together. And that's that's something that won't be apparent until we start banging bodies and get into training camp and preseason.
How tough is it to be patient, though, for a guy that you did draft high, but again, has dealt with a lot of injuries, hasn't played a ton of football on the NFL level, to know when it's right to pull the ripcord at tackle and say, all right, maybe his best position is at guard?
Well, I think when everybody else weighs in on it, I think you can't fool players. You can't fool the locker room. You can't fool any of these guys that have been doing this for their whole lives. Eventually, it'll become apparent. And two wrongs don't make a right. So at some point, these players have to swim. They have to do it on their own. You have to get rid of the life jackets. And at some point, you got to play. And I would think 3 years into a career, Evan Neal will have to prove what he is or what he isn't. And then the Giants will have to make decisions based on that.
Yep, I think that makes sense. All right, you talked about reallocating money. Well, they reallocated a whole lot of money to Brian Burns after they traded for him in free agency, Randy. You talk about the money that they could have paid Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney. Well, you add it together, and it basically adds up to Brian Burns and what that trade ended up being. Yep. Let's start with the deal first. Generally speaking, I'm against using 2 buckets of assets to obtain a player, having to use a draft pick to obtain him in a trade, and then use a lot of cap space to re-sign him. But I think you pointed this out in your article as well. For a defensive end like this, you have to pay a toll just to have access to him, right? This guy does not reach free agency. And I think that's why you're a little more willing to send the pick and then sign the contract, right? Because pass rushers like this just don't become available on the market.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you have a chance to get a talent like this unless you have the first pick in an NFL draft. I mean, that's how much of a priority a pass rusher with Brian Burns' skill set brings to the table. So you just don't have a chance. You got to suck it up, and here's your opportunity to do it. The fact that they gave a second and a fifth for him, that's relatively cheap. Trust me, that is to acquire his skill set and his talent in a system that they feel like he fits with. It's like having an extra first-round pick. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, they cost a lot of money to sign. Guess what? Good players cost a lot of money. That's just the way it is. They're going to have to work around that, not this year, maybe not next year, but in time. We all know that the average per deal equals cap dollars eventually. His $15 million cap number this year might be 40 in 3 or 4 years, but that's life and times of talented, really good players, and you got to build around that fact.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
And it's funny, I loved him coming out of the draft in 2019. He got picked 1 selection before the Giants took Dexter Lawrence, and I was crushed at the time. I won the Giants, I wound up with Brian Burns. Now, it all worked out. Dexter Lawrence is phenomenal. But it's funny. I was surprised his production wasn't a little bit better the first 5 years in his career. Only 1 double-digit sack season. Very consistent. Was never below 7.5. Then I went back and looked at the tape after the trade again, and it was like falling in love with the player all over again. The array of moves, the motor. Yeah, he has the speed to bend the edge as kind of the base, but then he uses the long arm for power. He has the counter spin moves inside and outside. I'm frankly confused, Randy, how this guy wasn't more productive based on what I saw when I rewatched this tape after the trade.
No, I agree with you 100%. I don't think you can really evaluate his production on paper. I just don't think that does it justice. And you're right. I think it was 8 or 8.5 sacks this year. He's a way better player than that. And I think they'll be disappointed if they don't get 10 or 12 sacks out of him in their scheme in New York. Now, some of the issues they had in Carolina is that they were never ahead, so they could never rush the passer this past year. So his opportunities were somewhat limited because they're always, in catch-up mode, and teams are running the ball down their throat a lot of times. So put this guy in a good defense where you can pin your ears back occasionally and have a lead. There's your 12 sacks, in my opinion.
When you're building a team, how valuable is it to create a unit that your opponent has to game plan against, right? So now the Giants are rolling out a defensive front that features Thibodeau on one end, Burns on the other. You throw an Ojulari as a situational pass rusher, Dexter Lawrence in the middle. When you're building, are you trying to figure out a unit, preferably up front, from my perspective, where you really have a strength that the other team has to game plan against?
100%. That's the name of the game, right? It's no different on the offensive side. When you get somebody that can run fast, defenses have to defend you differently. Yeah. You get a couple guys can rush the passer. They have to be aware of where their protections are, where they turn their protections, who's involved in the protections on every snap. It's not just an occasional thought. So it affects the winning and losing, I think, in game planning week to week more than anything else. And that's why you see the money spent on these priority positions, guys that can rush the passer, guys that can run fast, tackles that can protect the backside. Those are the primary positions where you got to grin and bear it with as far as the cap dollars you have to commit. But do we want to get better? Do we want to win? And then we got to trust our coaches to actually put them in the best position where their skill sets are the most positive. And that's the challenge.
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day to every day, Citizens is made ready for Giant fans with insights, guidance, and solutions. Learn more at citizensbank.com. We're joined by Randy Mueller. Randy, let's jump to the other free agent sign that I would consider significant, and that was bringing in Devin Singletary to plug the hole left by Saquon Barkley's departure to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I got to be honest, when I went back and rewatched Devin Singletary's tape, I was really impressed. I think his height at 5'7" is actually an advantage for him. I think it gives him really good contact balance and the ability to make guys miss in small areas. You know, he doesn't have the explosive long game ability of Saquon with his top end speed. But I'll be honest with you. I mean, from down to down on a consistency basis, I think Singletary is going to be just fine.
Really good player. I agree with you. I think the way he plays and at the stature he is, he's a hard guy to locate in traffic as well.
Yeah.
You get in the box when there's, a lot of big men in there. He can, I don't want to say he can hide, but he can hide and make defenders struggle to really find out where he's at because he has quickness. He has an explosive first step that makes it hard to get a real shot on him. So I agree with you. I think when you equate his skill set to where Barkley is, you definitely lose a little bit of the top end of the fifth gear. There's maybe not the same fifth gear, but when you talk about one guy counting 3.7 million and another guy counting 13.5 or whatever Barkley's deal was, and all the other things you can do, I don't think it's a big step back. And I think the Giants are going about it in the right way. And you mentioned all these superlatives. I'm with you. There's a reason I put them number one on that list for the Athletic last week, because I do like all these moves. I'm not just scratching your back here.
No, absolutely. As a GM, what did you think about, Randy, of renegotiating contracts and pushing money back? What type of players were you willing to do that with? And at what point in your building process, as you're building your franchise and your team, are you willing to start making those moves where you take an Andrew Thomas contract, you take a Dexter Lawrence contract, you turn some base into signing bonus, you push it back? Do you wait until you're closer to competing to do that? Or is that something you'll be willing to do now if it means the ability to be a little bit more aggressive in free agency?
Well, I think the patience level nowadays is not what it used to be. So everybody long-term now, it's 2 or 3 years. So you've got to kind of focus your vision on the next couple of years. And you would love to be able to not do that until you get over the hump as a team build, right? Sometimes you got to press a little bit now, and you see teams do it. What you give up when you do it is flexibility in the future. You just don't have a way to tinker with your roster as much a year from now or 2 years from now. I mean, look at what the Saints have done. They've done this every year. And yeah, people can say they just keep kicking the can, but it takes away their flexibility. They can't rebuild really anything because they're upside down with all these contracts. That's the key. I think the biggest thing for the Giants is they got to figure out what happens with Darren Waller. His contract is on the books, and it's not one that's upside down. Their thinking is they've kind of pushed what they can to the future now. Now it's a matter of getting better through the draft and adding some younger pieces, and I think they'll do that. But the Waller contract, for me, still is a little bit of, it puts them in limbo as to what's going to happen with that.
Randy, and we'll get to the draft in a second. One thing that drives me nuts, and I imagine it does for you too, is these people that say the salary cap doesn't exist. Because eventually the money winds up on the cap. Like, you can keep using these magic tricks to push it back. Eventually that dead cap hit is going to find you down the road. It doesn't disappear. It's going to be there. Yeah. Eventually those cap hits at the end of, for example, of Jalen Hurts' contract, they're going to hit. Dak Prescott's $60 million cap hit this year. It hit. Like, it comes eventually. And, the cap eventually becomes real, even if you can play some tricks with it in the short term.
The best way I describe it to people, John, is that when we use our credit cards and pull it out during the week when we're buying something, and if we get to the point where we max it out completely, we don't get to shred that credit card and just go get a new one. Eventually, you have to pay the bill. The bank isn't going to allow you to do that. And that's what the crowd that's the cap is fake doesn't understand. You have to pay these bills. So at times, at some point, you're going to have to pay the piper. We saw it happen in LA with the Rams the last couple of years after they won the Super Bowl and gave all in to all these, said, forget the picks. We're going to pay this, pay that. Eventually, they've had to come back to earth and pay the piper, just like we would if we charged everything we bought on our credit card. Once we get maxed out, we have to start to pay the bill. That's just the way the cap works.
Giant fans love a winner. It's why they love Citizens, named a 2022 best bank in the U.S. by The Banker as the official bank of the Giants and sponsor of the Huddle. Citizens is made ready for fans of Big Blue. Learn more at citizensbank.com. All right, Randy, let's jump to the draft here. Giants sitting pretty at number 6. I think it's a great year to be picking 6. I think there's a huge number of blue chip prospects in this draft class compared to what we've seen the last few years. I'll just give you the broad spectrum question first, then we can dig into it a little bit. What do you think the Giants' main goal should be with that 6th overall pick?
Well, I think in general, they should pick the highest player that's rated on their board. That's what they should do. And I know that's kind of a downer for a lot of draft nicks that want to plug and play all these players and fill needs here and there. I got news for you. If they don't get at 6 a player that's ranked in their top 3 or 4, that would be disappointing, regardless of position. Now, I understand we may have some position priority. Whether they end up entering that quarterback market, I don't know. You know more about that than I do, John, where they and how they feel about Daniel Jones. I know this. Caleb Williams sets himself apart. After that, there's a group of 4 or 5, including quarterbacks, including receivers, that I think are really good players, but there's a little bit of a gap. So I'm not sure I'd be willing to trade up to nail one of these guys rather than just sit tight and take what comes to me, being I'm where the Giants are in their team build. So a general answer, a more specific answer if I'm the Giants, hey, that's my view from the left coast, 3,000 miles away.
All right, so let's dig into it then, and we'll get to the quarterback concept and evaluation process in a second. I have trouble passing on, and I'm going to go receiver, just because I think you have a few really, really good high-level receivers in this class. And I think, Randy, and you can disagree with you, I think the Giants need to have a go-to game planning for defenses worthy wide receiver to supplement the speed of Hyatt, the quickness of Wan'Dale Robinson. I think it kind of sets up their whole receiving core. I have trouble passing on one of those guys if I'm taking a quarterback that I don't genuinely believe has a good chance to becoming, a top 8 guy that can carry your team like some of the best quarterbacks in the league. But we know how important quarterback is as well. So how would you balance that choice as a GM?
Well, I think it's a great time to be where they are and have to answer that question. But you're exactly right. We don't know how the Giants feel about these quarterbacks. I'm kind of, I have one that I like other than Caleb that I would be willing to kind of go up for. It may be different than who you like, John. So it all depends on how they view him and then the fact of what it would take to get him. I agree with you. I think the 3 receivers are all really good NFL receivers. But I think more importantly than anything is the skill sets are all different.
Yeah.
These 3 receivers are all a little different. So rather than match the name with the team, you need to then match the skill set we are missing with the guys we have. And so that'll be interesting. I know this in evaluating receivers, and this has just been my history. If you can't get away from people, you're going to struggle at the NFL level, no matter how good you can catch. You have got to be able to separate and get away from people. And I know for a fact that the neighbor's kid can separate and get away from people. And I think I know that Oduzzi can do the same. I don't know where I am really on Harrison as being the guy that can get away from everybody all the time. He's the biggest. He's the best catcher of the bunch. I get it. But it all depends on what skill set you put at the top of your criteria list. The Giants may have a different criteria than you or me. So it kind of depends on which they prioritize first, and that will lead you to the receiver they select if they should go for a receiver.
Yeah, it's funny. That's kind of where I stand here, Randy, because I love Malik Neighbors. He's just so explosive, gets the ball in his hands. He goes from 0 to 50 in a second. I mean, I was here at Odell Beckham's first 3 or 4 years before he broke his ankle when he caught those, 10-yard slants against Baltimore and boom, 75-yard touchdowns. That's what Malik Neighbors looks like to me, that type of explosive athlete. But I also think that in the Giants' current wide receiver room, with the speed of Hyatt, the slot play of Wan'Dale Robinson, the speed of Slayton, I think a big-bodied wide receiver like Rome Odunze would really fit in perfectly in that group. So how do you balance then where maybe the grade on Neighbors is slightly higher, but you think Odunze is a better fit with your team?
Well, I think that's the art of team building, right? And that's why you have to get into precise discussions internally on identifying identifying the criteria you want and then prioritizing that criteria. There won't ever be a tie. There will be a criteria that they set that a certain receiver might score higher on the highest priority in their scheme. But I'm with you on Aduzze. I think he's the combination of the two guys together myself. I think you've got Harrison, the big guy on the front side. Then you've got Neighbors, the smaller guy. I'm not sure Aduzze isn't the best of both worlds. He's kind of the combination of all of them. And if you know the kid's background, you knew the kid's work ethic, you knew where he comes from, I'm wanting that on my team on any day. And I understand that, in fact, as we speak, I think the Ohio State Pro Day is happening. I don't think Harrison is going to do anything.
Nope.
That doesn't really register great for me, but I understand he's a good enough player. I think the gamble he's taking by not working out is that he's gambling that everybody sees on film everything that they need, like he does, or like his advisors think they should. But NFL evaluators are very critical, and they take a lot of selling. They take a lot to get on their side, a lot of recruiting. If they don't see something, and if he does nothing to help close that gap, it may cost him. So there's a little bit of a gamble there. I don't have any doubts about Aduzze. So that may solve some of the issues right there.
Yeah, his toughness and intangibles, teams are going to fall in love with him. He is the opposite of the diva wide receiver, everything I've heard. So
yes.
I totally get where you're coming
yes.
from on that. And I think, the Giants had an LSU receiver here that there was some off the field stuff that there were things, and I don't think there's any worry that Adunze would be that type of guy. And I've heard Neighbors isn't that type of guy either, by the way. But from everything I know, Adunze should not be that type of guy. You mentioned the quarterbacks. I'm with you. I have Caleb Williams standing alone as the top quarterback in the class. You mentioned you had a guy or two that you maybe liked in that next group more than others. Give me your evaluation of kind of that next group of 4 or 5 quarterbacks.
Well, for me, I think the guy with the highest ceiling and the guy who translates to the pro game best is J.J. McCarthy. You might think I'm crazy, but he has the arm, he has the accuracy, he has the ability to process. And I think better than all the rest of these guys, for me, he has the ability to make tight window throws. He puts it in areas that are going to be on NFL Sundays. Those are the throws you have to make. There's no running around. There's no throwing into open spaces where guys are on their way to get there. You don't have those kind of open field throws. You've got to zip it into tight coverage and sometimes anticipate to throw people open. And I have seen enough of that for me to think that he will be able to project to the next level very well. I like Jaden Daniels as well. I think he's also a guy that can process from the pocket. Eventually, as you know, they make you throw from the pocket. You've got to process, you've got to throw accurately and get it out on time from the pocket. I think McCarthy does that best for me. I think Jaden does that second for me. I'm not as high on the Drake May train, but I understand Drake May be the flavor that some guys like, and he may be a good pro. I'm not here to pound Drake May. I just think the other guys do some things that I think are more important, better at this stage in their career.
All right, you set up my last topic perfectly, Randy, because I think J.J. McCarthy is a great Rorschach test of how you look at quarterbacks. And Kurt Warner has been on Twitter talking about how he has difficulty evaluating college quarterbacks, right? And Lance Zierlein tweeted the other day, who's done this for a long time, draft evaluation, does a great job, does a lot of work in it, that he's found that NFL decision makers, GMs, position coaches, OCs, head coaches like J.J. McCarthy a lot more than the media and fan scouts, people like me that watch this stuff from a rudimentary basis. So I've gotten through about half of McCarthy's stats. I think I'm through week 7 of his season. And I love the way he throws over the middle. His accuracy on crossers, I think, is phenomenal. And I think willingness to throw over the middle is huge. He's mobile. Don't love the deep ball on tape. I don't think he gets enough arc on. I think he's a little bit too line drivey on his deep throws. But I see, and what I like best about him, and I think it's a fair hit on him that, all right, well, Michigan ran the ball a lot. Teams are worried about the run. He's not asked to do as much. But then you turn on his 3rd and long tape, and on 3rd and 7+, he's phenomenal. Like, he's really good. So I'm slowly kind of selling myself on the idea. So pardon me for the long-winded question. What do you think NFL coaches, GMs, evaluators, people like you are seeing in McCarthy that someone like me either isn't seeing, or maybe just because we don't know enough aren't capable of seeing?
Well, I'm not sure you're not seeing it all. I think you're seeing it because your description sounds a lot like my evaluation. I think people are having a hard time catching up to the evaluation with him. When I studied the McCarthy stuff, it was probably late November, early December for me. And I said at the time, this is the guy who's heir apparent to Caleb. It's not any of these other guys, but nobody at that point had even mentioned him yet. I know NFL scouts that had him as a third round grade. So they weren't, and they didn't see enough to connect the dots. Eventually, what I figured was NFL coaches who are a little bit busy during the fall would actually look at the tape in January, and GMs would do the same thing, look at more tape in January. And knowing what I know about making those decisions, they would raise this kid up to where we're talking about him now as potential going anywhere from 2 to 6, 2 to 10 per se. So I don't know that you're seeing anything different. I don't see anything that I don't like, other than I think you're onto something with the deep ball. But you see this kid layer and change trajectory on medium to medium long range throws. So I think it's in there. I think he can improve in that area, but for the rest of his game, I just don't see the holes in it. And I love the fact that he just turned 21. If he goes with the right offense and the right scheme, I think he has the biggest upside as well, because you don't have to deprogram him at all. He's been in a pro system. He's understood being coached by pro people. There's really no connecting of dots for the intangibles. Those are all apparent right in front of you. So, I mean, I'm sounding like an advertisement for JJ McCarthy. I like these other guys, but I just think that I have less doubts about McCarthy than any other guys.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
All right, I want to touch on a couple more quarterbacks and one general quarterback question, Randy. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate the time. Drake May, I'm a big fan of. Much like McCarthy, I think he's willing to throw it into small windows in the middle of the field, and he makes a lot of NFL throws on his tape. Now, the problem is that he's a little scattershot in there, right? And sometimes the ball can be a little all over the place. And sometimes I think he presses a lot, and the decision-making can maybe not sometimes be the best at times. But I wonder how much of that has to do with the situation he was in Carolina, where he gets in a better situation, where there's better things going on around him, where he's going to be able to clean some of that stuff up, and some of the raw tools will be able to show out a little bit better when he gets into a better situation with better players around him.
I think you're right. I think the decision-making is somewhat problematic for me, but I think more than anything for me with Drake May is I don't see the arm strength. I don't see the accuracy as things that are really going to improve. His release for me is, it's a little long at times. It just doesn't come out with any oomph like I like it. Now, I didn't find myself saying wow much when I watched the tape. When I watched some of these other guys, especially with McCarthy, especially with Caleb, I would say, wow, way more than I probably should have, because I'm not one of those up and down guys that react to every play or really every good. I don't need to see a guy's best game to decide how I feel about him. So I don't think physically it's all there for me when I watch the Drake May stuff. Much like, and I'm not saying he's this guy, but much like when I watched Mac Jones and the year he came out, you heard all the talk about Mac Jones this, Mac Jones that. I just never saw it physically. And I'm a little, not maybe to that level, but I'm a little bit like that when I watch Drake May's stuff. It's just not physically all the tools that I want. It's funny, when you ask a lot of people about Drake May, and you'll be a good judge of this, most of the time, the first thing out of people's mouth is, well, he's 6'4", he's 222 pounds. That comes out right away, right? And I understand that the frame matters. I understand that the guy's size matters, and that's the way you draw him up. But come off of that, and then to evaluate some of the other things, I just didn't see much wow in his game. I kept waiting to see more.
All right, I want to jump into the two potential. Let's say the Giants end up going receiver at 6, right? But you still want to maybe get another quarterback in the building to let Brian Dable get his hands on him, develop him. Do you think Bo Nix and Michael Penix might drop into round 2 in this draft? With the medicals on Penix scare people enough? I know you're a pretty big Penix guy, listening to your podcast with Mike Sando. Your thoughts on those two guys and whether or not those are worthy day 2 investments as guys you can maybe develop into a starter down the road?
Well, I think that's possible. I think the medical stuff will be a big thing with Penix, without a doubt. I think Penix, for me, between those two, I mean, I would just welcome people to watch both their games against each other. I don't think there was a lot of comparison. I thought Penix is one of those guys for me, John, that when I watched him, even at the Senior Bowl, he's just got a throwing motion that I could watch him throw all day. I just want to watch him. I watch him throw to neighbor kids. I don't care who he's throwing to,
Which is
in what
odd for a
environment.
lefty, by the way.
want to watch
Usually
him.
lefties are a little
Yes.
wonky, right?
Yes, I love watching him throw, especially deep balls. So I'm not going to say that he can't do it. Now, the lateral ability sometimes bothers me with him because, as we know, pockets are seldom clean in the NFL, and you're going to have to move. I see him moving a little bit within the pocket, kind of resetting his feet. So that's there. He's not going to take off and run for yards in the NFL. So that's a little bit problematic. For me, Bo Nix is a little bit all over the place. And I'm guilty of my first impression being at Auburn. And I have a hard time erasing that from my memory bank because that wasn't pretty. I mean, basically, he got fired at Auburn. And that's why he went to Oregon. So there's a lot of things that I remember seeing at Auburn that I just struggle getting rid of in my own mind when you see it with your own two eyes. So I think he has potential to improve. I don't think he's anywhere near being an NFL quarterback yet. But if you could get a guy like that in the second or third round and you're Sean Payton or somebody who I know can really work and develop quarterbacks, maybe that makes some sense. I think it's probably a mistake for someone to jump up in the first round to recreate something that may or may not be there. For me, that's filling need. And I think there will be other positional players that teams value more to help their team build than a project, so to speak, at quarterback.
That makes sense. All right, one general quarterback question, then I'm going to close with the Daniel Jones question. Why do you think quarterback are so difficult now to evaluate going, or have always been really, to go from college to the pros? Why do you think there are so many misses? I know for someone like me, for example, when some of these front office guys talk about J.J. McCarthy, based on some of the reporting I've seen, they're like, well, what he sees pre-snap, he gets to where he needs to go. He reads the, levels of the defense. He hits the right guys. For someone like me, I think that's hard to evaluate. I think NFL teams are much better and coaches are much better at seeing that than I am because they understand what the play is, what they're supposed to be looking at, where they're supposed to go. But for a GM, what for you is the most difficult thing about trying to project a college quarterback to the NFL, which has proven to be a very difficult thing over the years in the NFL, considering the first round hit rates?
Yeah, I think the number one thing for me, John, is the ability to process information. And that doesn't necessarily always come post-snap. It comes pre-snap as well. The college game is totally different. These college kids they might get 80, 85 plays in a college game. We don't get that many. They might fire the coach by the time we get the 85 players. That's how quick things happen at the NFL level. That's my point, is that they have to process tons of information, pre-snap, post-snap, that we can't wait till the quarterback comes off to decipher what they did or wait to make a halftime adjustment. It doesn't happen. We get 55 plays. We got to do it on the spot. So the ability to process matters. And you alluded to it a little bit in your evaluations. I think it is hard sometimes for people to figure out what he's been asked to do. Sometimes the schemes limit how many options a quarterback has, especially at the college level, because they can afford to just call plays. And there's a difference between calling plays and instituting running an NFL offense where the scheme matters, answers matter, on the field matters right now. And in college, it's not like that. You can afford in college to call a play. If it doesn't work, go in the huddle, call another play, come run it. You don't have to change all the time. But there are some schemes that ask these quarterbacks to process and to do different things all the time, including call protections. And those are the systems, I think, where quarterbacks can come out of sooner and play at the NFL level. So that's a long answer. I apologize, but it is processing of information if you want to break it down.
No, I think that's a fantastic answer. All right, final question, Randy, before we say goodbye. How would you handle, and you don't have to get into specifics, you can just think about your thought process on it, with what the Giants have in Daniel Jones. Obviously, they liked him well enough last offseason to give him the contract they gave him. They also gave themselves an out in that contract, right? And you structure it wisely, so you give yourself that. Then the next year, he has a ton of injuries. He has a second neck injury. He has an ACL, so now you're worried about an injury issue moving forward. But he also didn't play well, but the circumstances around him in those games was just terrible. Loses his left tackle, loses Saquon Barkley. You're playing teams like the Dolphins, the Cowboys, the 49ers, some of the best teams in the NFL, and he admittedly struggled in those games. But the sample size was small, and the line was terrible, and there wasn't a lot of good things going on around him. How would you handle that moving forward here in terms of prioritizing a Cowboy in the draft? Is just adding a guy like Drew Lock good enough? Then you can attack it the following year. But you don't want to be picking this high again, right? So do you want to strike when the iron's hot? How would you just go about that whole process like the Giants are right now at Daniel Jones?
Well, I would say this. If the quarterback that they love is there at 6, I think you almost have to pick him because you're right. You'll never be picking up there again. If you are, somebody else is probably making the picks. So if you have a guy that you really like, that you think is your future for 10, 15 years, then you've got to pick him. Regarding Daniel Jones, I think at some point, and it's a lot like we talked about with Evan Neal, at some point, Daniel has to get better. At some point, he has to play. And I've been a Daniel Jones fan since his freshman year at Duke. And I remember being in the press box at Duke during that year. I was with the Chargers at the time saying, this kid's got all the skill set. I see the upside. I see the talent. But there's come a time when, for me, he just hasn't developed. And he's had a couple stops along the way where I've seen signs of it. In Dayball's first year, Shane's first year, I thought they got more out of him than at any time, including his 4 years at Duke, where he got better. So that's, I'm sure, why they gave the contract they did. They see the upside. But one, you got to stay healthy, and two, you got to continue to develop and play really good. I don't know the answer to how long we wait. I think you wait as long as you don't have a better option. But if you have a better option and you think a quarterback there at 6 is a better option, you almost have to act on it. Nothing detrimental about Daniel Jones. It's just that we got to do what's right for the Giants.
I think that's a great answer. Randy, we already mentioned a lot of the stuff you're up to. Tell the folks anything else you want them to know before we say goodbye.
No, I'm not here to sell anything. I'm here to talk ball, and I do love my gig. The platform that The Athletic has given me has been awesome. I mean, you mentioned the Football GM podcast that comes out Saturday mornings. Mike Sando and I, their national writer, have known each other for 30 years. You know, most of the fans know I spent 20 years with the Seahawks, and I'm a Seattle guy, and so is Mike. So we go way back. I get a lot of kick out of that, but they've allowed me a little platform to write as well, and I love to watch film. So that's a good way to express what I see on film.
Randy, you do awesome work, and that's why we had you on. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, everybody, on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. Thank you to Randy Mueller. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Cocoa Beach, Orlando's closest beach, welcomes you with cool vibes and tasty waves. The surfing capital of the East Coast, Cocoa Beach is your authentic Florida beach town with a laid-back charm. Drop into an ocean of fun with the tastiest waves on the East Coast and chill in the coolest spots under the sun. Cocoa Beach, it's legendary. Plan your trip now at legendarycocobeach.com. Cocoa Beach on Florida's Space Coast.
Are you self-conscious about your smile due to stains? Have you ever wished that you had a whiter and brighter smile? Smile Actives is a safe and affordable alternative to expensive whitening procedures. You simply add Smile Actives gel to your toothpaste every time you brush your teeth, making it the easiest teeth whitening solution out there. In a clinical trial, Smile Actives users reported up to 5 shades whiter on average, all within 7 days. No change to your routine, no extra time. Right now, they are running a buy one, get one offer. Hurry to smileactives.com/iHeart today to receive this special offer with free shipping and handling.